Good evening and happy Sabbath to each one of you. It's a privilege to have the Sabbath. I was thinking while we were singing that since I was a child, always when I heard this word, Sabbath, it was like something that would make my heart look forward to it. Because till at the age of 3 or 4, Sabbath was like a burden for me. I was always wondering when the Sabbath is going to end. Always, especially because I have 2 brothers, so imagine a house with children, we always tried to play. And the parents would tell us, wait till the Sabbath is over. Wait till the Sabbath is over. So my only goal was when the Sabbath is over. Till one day when I was traveling with my father, and he got one of his workmates with him, with us also. And at some point, this workmate made a statement. And he tells to my father, at least you got the Saturday, the Sabbath, as you call. A day when you can rest. And my father at that time, he said, well, but you got the Sunday, so it's the same thing. And this person said, no, it's not the same thing. Because on Sunday we have to cook, we have to do laundry, we have to do all kinds of stuff. So the Sabbath for him, the Sunday for him was not a Sabbath. And that's true, because when God created man, during the creation, each day had something in it. In the 6th day, God created the man. And he gave him, in the 7th day, the rest. So we are so blessed that we have this rest, that we can rest, we can relax a little bit after a long week. So this is just a history of the Sabbath, how we got it. Does it have to do with Reformation? Because we were speaking this weekend, especially about Nehemiah and the Reformation that he made. How many of you enjoy the Sabbath? So that means that you are a Sabbath keeper, right? So why do we have to reform this Sabbath? And I found it important because very related with the sealing message. And look at this statement, says that Satan is now using every device in this sealing time to keep the minds of God's people from the present truth and to cause them to waver. So as we already noticed, I changed them. As we already noticed, we all enjoy the Sabbath. And Satan is trying to make us to waver. We are in the time when we need to restore all the institutions that God gave us. Which are these institutions? It is the marriage and the Sabbath. And we know how much Satan tried to attack the Sabbath. And even him tried to change it. Praise the Lord that we know that Saturday is the Holy Sabbath of the Lord. But even though we know, he's still trying to attack us. He's still trying to make us to break this Sabbath. And in this evening, we are going to see some things that we can fix. We can reflect, each one of us, to the statements that we are going to read. But it's important here, it says that Satan is using every device in this sealing time to keep us busy. And I have a friend, and he got a ticket in the state of Virginia, and he was living at that time in Louisiana. And he got a ticket, and he forgot about the ticket. And just one day before to be in the front of the court, he found the letter. And he looked at it, and he said, there is no way for me to be in a few hours in Virginia. So then he called there, and the lawyer helped him, and he solved the case. But imagine about each one of us today, because we are in the time of the investigative judgment, when each case is judged in the eyes of the Lord, and He is going to seal. So when we know that we got a ticket, we try to always to find the evidences. We try to find something that could help us to get away easier with that, to look for mercy. But Satan is trying to keep us busy, that we might forget that we are in this time, and we are going to be sealed, and the seal of God won't be on our heads. It says that the great mass of professing Christians will meet with bitter disappointment in the day of God. They have not upon their foreheads the seal of the living God. And here it says the great mass of professing Christians. America is a country where they said that we founded this country on Bible, on Christian beliefs. So the majority is professing Christian people, we could tell. What about us? We mentioned that we are Sabbath keepers. So let's read it again. The great mass of professing Sabbath keepers says that we'll meet with bitter disappointment in the day of God, in the day when Jesus is coming, because they will notice that they have not upon their foreheads the seal of the living God. And they won't receive this seal of the living God because they do not keep His commandments or bear the fruits of righteousness. And as Brother Les quoted the verse for tonight, among the God's commandments, there is this commandment, the first commandment, which is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And I mentioned that Nehemiah had to deal with the Sabbath question. And now just think a little bit. Was he dealing with people that they never knew the Sabbath? No. So then why the commandment says they remember? Did they forget that Saturday is the Sabbath of the Lord? They were still keeping the Sabbath. What did they forget, in fact? The holiness of the Sabbath. So they still believed that the Saturday is the Sabbath of the Lord. But they forgot what does it mean to keep it holy and how to keep it holy. And let's read what happened, what Nehemiah noticed when he got to Jerusalem. It says that there dwelt men of Tyre. In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in the sheaves, and leading asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah, and in Jerusalem. So who were the children of Judah? The Sabbath keepers. And they were doing all kind of business in this day. So as I mentioned, they didn't forget that the Saturday is the Sabbath of the Lord. But they forgot that in this day we should not do any business like that. And then it says that Nehemiah gathers the nobles of Judah and said unto them, what evil thing is this that you do and profane the Sabbath day? He tried to make them realize. He tried to remind them. The commandment says that remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And this was the job of Nehemiah, bringing all the rulers of Jerusalem, all the nobles of Judah, and asking them, what is happening among you? Did not your fathers thus? And did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet he bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. The reason they had to go to Babylon as slaves was because they did not keep the Sabbath holy. And now they were supposed to keep the Sabbath holy. They were supposed to rejoice that they are living again in freedom, but they are stepping on the same mistakes that their fathers did. And Nehemiah is asking them, why are you doing this? Do you remember your parents? They did the same, and because of that, we had to be there in Babylon. And look at this statement. It says that had the rulers exerted their influence and exercised their authority, this state of things might have been prevented. So this evil didn't start it suddenly, altogether. They compromised today something, and they said, oh, it's okay, maybe it's just a child. Let him go and buy this dove. Tomorrow, they did something bigger than that, greater. And they got to the point where they didn't see the holiness of the Sabbath anymore. And it says that if the rulers would have exerted their influence, they could prevent this. But their desire to advance their own secular interest led them to favor the ungodly. So what was the problem? The leaders could deal with that, could prevent this. But they were supposed to win something from this. Probably these people that were there coming to sell things, they would pay taxes. So they got something to win from this. It is mingling our interest with the interest of unbelievers that leads to apostasy and the ruin of the soul. And someone mentioned yesterday that when we want to reach someone, it's better to pray for those people, not to associate that close with them, because it's easier for us to fail than to win them. So it's better to keep distance, not to get so close, so accustomed with them, because then we say that, well, there is nothing wrong anymore. So the Sabbath is a test, not a human requirement, but God's test. It is that which will distinguish between those who serve God and those who serve Him not. And upon this point will come the last great conflict of the controversy between truth and error. So what is the Sabbath? It's a test. It's something that can prove that you are a child of God. Do you remember the Pharisees and all the people, the Jewish that came to Jesus, and they said, well, but we are children of Abraham. And what did Jesus say? If you are children of Abraham, you should do his works. You should keep the Sabbath the way Abraham kept. So the same is even today. If you want to prove that you are God's child, you need to keep the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And Nehemiah saw that people forgot what does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy. So then he came with a solution. He understood that the leaders didn't do anything to prevent it. But he begged them, okay, we have to solve this somehow. And he says that it came to pass, and when the gates of Jerusalem began to dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants said at the gates that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. So you notice there are two steps that Nehemiah takes in reforming the Sabbath. The first one was to close the gates. During the week they could do all kind of business, but we have to keep the Sabbath holy. So then, before the Sabbath came, before the sunset, they closed the gates of the city. The second one was, no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. And let's apply this to our personal lives. First step is to close the gates. And each one of us has different gates. And you can see them on the picture there. The gates of the soul, which are the eyes You name the other one. Is the ear, nose, touch, and taste. So every Friday, we should do this. And I tell you why. One time, in my family, we used to open the Sabbath, and after that, we would have dinner together. And at that time, I don't know how, there was a newspaper on the table. And I was keeping the Sabbath, but my eyes started to read those letters, those characters which were there on the newspaper. So my mom saw it and took it and hid it somewhere. So we need to do this. It says that when the Sabbath commences, we should place a guard upon ourselves, upon our acts and our words, lest we rob God by appropriating to our own use that time which is strictly to the Lord. And how many of you like history here? I mentioned to you about people that they didn't keep the Sabbath. They had to go to Babylon. Do you remember how was Babylon defeated? They had this feast, King Belshazzar. He had a feast there, and he invited everyone there. So the guardians, they saw that there is no danger. They went to the feast. They closed the gates, but there were some gates that they forgot to close. Through the walls of the city, there was a river coming. There was water. And they had these iron gates that they would close in case of war. But they said that no one is going to swim. So it was no danger for them. It represented no danger. So they left these doors open. And while they were at the feast, they were defeated. People entered through, the enemy came through those gates, and they were defeated. So the same, remember the gates that we have to close. We had them here. Every Friday we should do that. To leave everything that is not holy, to leave aside. So this was the first step. The second step was that no burden should be on the Sabbath, brought on the Sabbath. And I read this article, and the first line says that a group of Americans living 10 years longer. And I was curious why they live longer. And of course, during on this reading, you find that they do not use any alcohol, they do not use any smoking or other stuffs, but they are even vegetarians, and they do exercise. So I said, that's something that I can do it also. But later on, I read that they have a day when they do not worry about anything. Like if they have to pay bills, everyone has to pay bills here. On Friday, after the sunset, they do not think about the bills anymore, because it's the Sabbath, and they leave all these worldly things away. One day. And then, at the end of the Sabbath, they start thinking again about their trials, their business. And the same, that was one of the happiness that I had while I was in school, because you have a lot of homework and a lot of exams. But while I knew that Friday is coming, I knew, okay, till Sunday I don't have to do any homework. So that was something good. But God created the Sabbath because he knew that we need to restart our organism. He knew that we need to stop it and reboot. And while the French Revolution was, Napoleon tried to change everything. He tried to erase everything that reminds us of God. And he even tried to change the weekly cycle. So we have the week made of 7 days. 6 days to work, and the 7th day to rest. But he said, no, we can work 10 days. And in the 7th day, even the horses, while plowing, while working in the fields, they would fall down tired. And that's why they came back to the original cycle. So God created each one of us with the Sabbath. If you don't want to keep this, it's for your own curse. It says that on Friday, let the preparation for the Sabbath be completed. See that all the clothing is in readiness and all the cooking is done. Let the boots be blacked and the baths taken. It is possible to do this. If you make it a rule, you can do it. So there is no words like I don't have time, I didn't have time. It says that you can do it. And if you make it a rule, you can do it. The Sabbath is not to be given to the repairing of garments, to the cooking of food, to pleasure seeking, or to any worldly employment. Before the setting of the sun, let all secular work be laid aside and all secular papers be put out of the sight. Do you remember the newsletter that I was talking about? On Friday, before the sun, put it aside, because Satan is trying to place them in front of your eyes, and you can break the Sabbath. And it says that even parents, they have to work together with the children. It says that explain to your work and its purpose to your children, and let them share in your preparation to keep the Sabbath according to the commandment. While I was a child, I mentioned that I have 2 brothers. On Fridays, we had a working team. During the week, we were busy. We went to school, our parents would go to work, but on Friday, everyone was there working together. And when we opened the Sabbath, we could spend the Sabbath together, not worry about anything. So parents and children should work together in this preparation. On this day, all differences between brethren, whether in the family or in the church, should be put away. Let all bitterness and wrath and malice be expelled from the soul. In a humble spirit, confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. So, if you remember, you need to take some time to reflect, like the same way we do now that we are ending this year, 2019. We take time to reflect to this passing year. The same every Friday, we need to take time to reflect to the passing week, to see if we did any wrong to someone, to see if we didn't forgive someone. And if you remember that you did some wrong, go to your friend, to your spouse, to your children, ask for forgiveness. And then think about Jesus. If you did any wrong to him on this past week, go aside and have a talk with him. Ask for forgiveness, that the Sabbath, the joy of the Sabbath may be complete. Before the Sabbath begins, all the members of the household should gather at the family altar to read the Word of God and worship Him through prayer and song. Children should take part in the family worship service, especially on the Sabbath. Long prayers and services should be avoided. One of the things that made me love the Sabbath, before, as I mentioned, I loved it because there was no homework to do on Sabbath. But after then, the Sabbath became a delight because I understood what it means. And more than that, being a child, I was involved. We took turns, like reading a verse, like participating with a poem. We're doing something. And I felt that I am useful. And being useful, I was encouraged. And the same way you can do with your children, to encourage them, to teach them to love the Sabbath. Because in this day, they can meet Jesus also. It says that everyone has a part in making the Sabbath meeting interesting. And tomorrow, don't forget to come to Brother Timmy and tell him, well, I just decided to participate in the program. If you don't like the program tomorrow, it's because you didn't participate. And here it says that everyone has a part in making the Sabbath programs to be interesting and wonderful. So see Brother Timmy and tell him that I want to participate also. Acts of necessity and mercy are permitted on the Sabbath. The sick and suffering are at all times to be cared for, but unnecessary labor is to be strictly avoided. None should permit themselves through the week to become so absorbed in their temporal interest and so extasiated by their efforts for worldly gain that on the Sabbath they have no strength or energy to give to the service of God. So this word, remember, it's a word that we have to think even from Saturday evening. As soon as we close the Sabbath, we have to think, okay, there is another Sabbath coming. So I have to coordinate all my schedules that on Friday I can open the Sabbath without being stressed that I didn't finish my work. And here it says that none should permit themselves to overwork themselves during the week, that on Sabbath to come to church and to be unfitted for the service. And in the same time, it says that we are robbing Christ by taking his time, and more than that, we are robbing ourselves as well. For we need the warmth and glow of association, as well as the strength to be gained from the wisdom and experience of other Christians. And let none come to the place of worship to do what? To take a nap. And last night I was talking with Brother Chipley here, and he said that God made the day to work and the night to sleep. So the Sabbath day is not the night. Shall we allow the service which involves eternal interest to be placed on a lower level than the temporal affairs of life? Because on the previous statement, I didn't read it all, it says that while we are dealing with things that are regarding our business, we have an interest on this. And even if you are sleepy, you keep yourself awake to finish it. So the same, we have to consider even the Sabbath, that it is important. If we desire the blessing promised to be to the obedient, we must observe the Sabbath more strictly. We love when we read promises. But if we desire them, if we desire the blessings, we must observe the Sabbath more strictly. And there is another paragraph, I can give it to you after, says that if we faithfully keep the Sabbath, then we will be able to keep all the commandments. And as even Nehemiah experienced, when he tried to reform, Satan didn't like that, and he was pushing also. Do you remember? I mentioned that the first step was to close the gates. Did the sellers, did the people that were doing business in the city, when they saw the doors are closed, did they go home? He says that they continued coming. And probably they were hoping that this old man is leaving and we can continue our business the way we did so far. They still hoped for an opportunity. But Nehemiah said, no, you better go because I'm not going to open the doors. So Satan is still trying to come. We have the doors closed, but there is still a newsletter somewhere. There is still Facebook somewhere. You know those advertisements that are coming, even watching YouTube while watching good stuff. But you should say, like Nehemiah, no, the door is closed. The door is closed. I will come back to you later. The sign of obedience is the paragraph that I mentioned. It says that the sign of obedience is the observance of the Sabbath, of the fourth commandment. If men keep the fourth commandment, they will keep all the rest. And to give you an encouragement, Nehemiah's efforts to restore the worship of the true God had been crowned with success. As long as the people were true to the oath they had taken, as long as they were obedient to God's word, so long would the Lord fulfill his promise by pouring rich blessing upon them. So this was the experience of Nehemiah. And as we end this year, we need to take time to reflect. How was I as a Sabbath keeper? And even if you didn't realize the importance of keeping the Sabbath so far, the Lord forgives us. He gives us more grace. But let's think about my path from now on. Who am I going to be in 2020? Think about this. If you really try, the Lord is going to provide. My sister-in-law is a nurse, and she lives in Germany. In all these years, she was almost in the danger to lose the job because she didn't want to take shifts on the Sabbath. But always there were some workmates that helped her, and she never had to work on the Sabbath. And my brother, when he moved there, he didn't speak German very well, so he didn't have much options. He found a job. He started working Monday to Friday. But you know, even here, during the winter times, the sunset is earlier a little bit. And since he started the job, he was always praying, Lord, help me when the time is coming to be able to talk to my boss, that he wants to lose the job, and he could go to keep the Sabbath also. And he didn't. He was always praying, but he never talked. He never had the courage to talk to the person. And when the time came that he had to go earlier home, the boss asked him, because he knew about his wife, that she is keeping the Sabbath, and the boss is asking him, you don't have to keep the Sabbath earlier today? And he said, yes, I wanted to talk to you about this. And another fact, he was faithful in his work. And because of that, every year, the company, they have a gathering, and they have like a fellowship together. And always they have it on Friday night. The first year, the boss told him, well, you just come and eat. You don't have to do anything. And he said, no, I can't. It's the Sabbath day. And the following year, they changed this meeting from Friday evening to Sunday evening, just because of one faithful person. So this is an encouragement. If you really want to keep the Sabbath, the Lord will help you. And many blessings will come, because the Lord blessed this day, and in this day you will be blessed if you close your gates and you are worthy of his presence. Amen.